if you ever want to be an ambassador, first you should own a saloon. You get to know everybody, know every type of person there is in the world. But, giving a little background on New Zealand, in 1987, New Zealand, because of the nuclear weapons being blown up in the Pacific, and also Greenpeace's Rainbow Warrior being blown up in Auckland, with a person on board asleep, and that person was killed, that was enough for the leadership of New Zealand. They decided they were going to be a nuclear-free country. And when they did that, there were political and diplomatic ramifications. Most notably, we had a relationship with New Zealand through the ANZUS Treaty, which combined the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, and a mutual defense pact. Of course, that evaporated when they took on this position. There was a clause in that nuclear-free position they took that said no nuclear-powered vessels could go in their waters. The only two companies or countries at the time that had nuclear-powered vessels was the Soviet Union and the U.S. So the folks in our country, in the Pentagon and the State Department, felt rather shunned by this. We got together with them. We understood their sovereign values. We said, let's leave as friends. So we made arrangements to have a frigate ship from the World War II vintage to visit New Zealand, have a farewell. It was actually going to be turned into Toyotas about 6 months later. That was the end of its career. But what happened in translation, the word never got out to when we asked for entry into their sovereign waters, it was denied. There's a policy we have that we neither confirm or deny if we have nuclear weapons on board. Well, New Zealand had been an ally of ours for many, many years. We knew that they knew that this frigate had no nuclear weapons. It was a 50s or 40s frigate. Anyway, a lot of heads rolled at Foggy Bottom. A lot of careers were stunted. And Pentagon, there were a lot of hard feelings. The junior officers in both those buildings were now senior officers in 2005 when I went there. And the same hard feelings existed. But this was post 9/11. This is a time when we had to really stand up and meet the agenda and find out who our friends truly were. And New Zealand was one of them. When Colin Powell was asked if they were an ally, Colin Powell said no, but they're very, very, very good friends. If some of you may remember that. But it was stemming from the fact that they were still a nuclear-free country, prohibiting any of our vessels in their waters because most of our fleet today is nuclear-powered. We've had nuclear-powered naval vessels going to Vietnam, but in the last few years, but we still haven't had one of our vessels in New Zealand waters since the late 80s. So with that backdrop, I arrived, having studied the last 20 years of ambassadors that had been appointed by various presidents until that time. And I was thinking, there has to be a stoppage somewhere of this 1,000-pound gorilla in the room that we're not addressing. And by chance, I was giving a speech at the Parliament building, and after a few toasts and a few wines, it was my turn to speak, and I got up and reached for my speech in my pocket, and it was a list of things I was supposed to give to my driver that my wife had given me. And here are 600 people out there. That's a wonderful feeling, folks, if you ever have that happen. And I spoke right from the soul. I said, the bottom line is I've watched the last 20 years of history between our two countries. I've come down here and I see this rock in the middle of the road that says nuclear free, and we're not getting anything done. My role is to build a path around that rock. My role is to build a road around that rock. My road is to build a freeway around that rock. By the time I said freeway, everyone's applauding. And it's going to be a two-way street. It's going to be a two-way freeway. And I set the agenda And people all through the time that I was there would refer to the rock in the road and how we're moving it. And it was a great theme that both sides lived by for the tenure that I was there. And we made a lot of progress. Now, some of the things that I arrived on November 3rd, 2005. It was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. And getting right into the humanities and right into the arts. And I wasn't kidding when I said every diplomat should sometimes be a bartender. I said, you know, let's get to the people of New Zealand and Wellington, get to the people who need the most. By Thanksgiving Day, we had an American Thanksgiving dinner presented to over 200 people of disadvantaged people in Wellington. 3 newspapers covered it, 3 TV stations covered it, and there are a multitude of radio interviews. That was my introductory to New Zealand, if you will. My wife, who had 2 years before, she was an important part of this project. 2 years before, she had taken the first Down syndrome woman across the English Channel as a swimmer. She had this wonderful DVD prepared, very inspirational, and that everyone loved. She was getting more requests for speeches by the end of my tenure than I was, which was fine because they had great golf courses down there. But she showed that she had a great sensitivity to New Zealand because she lived there at one point. It was a huge asset for me. She was my cultural attaché the first 6 months. We had visited 2 years before. And the third thing that really helped us was that we had both been deeply involved with the arts and humanities in the United States, not just in Oregon, but elsewhere in the country. We took a particular interest in the Native American people of the United States. If you visit my home, there's a totem pole next to the front door. And we have various pieces of art from a Native American contemporary artist hanging on our walls and Maori artists. Through the Arts and Embassy program, we were able to secure some wonderful pieces representing 18 tribes throughout the United States, pieces that had been donated over the years to the museum and were left in the vaults because there's no place to display these wonderful pieces. And that's true of every museum, by the way, globally. As people pass on, the private collections are being turned over to these museums, and they don't have the money to build the space to display them. And there's a huge treasure trove of opportunity there. So I decided that let's go after the first peoples of New Zealand and the first peoples of the United States. What a great common denominator. And by doing that, through the Arts and Embassy program, we secured those pieces from the Portland Art Museum that had been in storage. We had Native American contemporary artists from our collection that we brought to New Zealand. And on that wall over there, we had Maori contemporary artists who in many cases had studied with the same instructors from the States. And we found, again, there was a tremendous amount of interest. Whether you're speaking of the caves of Europe with the etchings or the souls that have been discovered in the receding snows of the Andes, there's a tremendous amount of curiosity and interest in the first peoples of every country. It's a great common denominator to build friendship. And there's lots of assets available to do that for you. We did this with great fanfare. The Maori priest came in, blessed the spirits of the folks that had woven and beaded those wonderful pieces that were on loan to us, some over 150 years old. Again, it was one of those great events that was well attended to by the press and the people that are the leadership and the opinion leaders of the Society of New Zealand. When you speak of New Zealand, you're speaking of Green Bay loving football and Green Bay loving football the same way the Kiwis love rugby. There's a passion for them. Well, I brought down the West Point rugby team. And again, it was one of those cultural exchanges with a few bruises and one broken nose. But again, it let them know that we were reaching out. And you know, as you keep doing this, you find that more doors open. Doors that were cautiously ajar were now wide open to other dialogue. There was one great minister who became very good friends of mine. He was the fellow who was the hatchet man for the New Zealand government. When there was something bad to be said about the United States, he was the guy they would go to. And as a protocol, you visit all of the ministers, and they saved this particular minister till last. So I had a lot of experience under my belt dealing with the ministers and how to speak to them and all. And I had a talking sheet and an agenda to address when I went in to speak to these people. And I walked into this guy's office, and he was about 6'3", good-looking guy, tough as nails. And in fact, 6 months after I left, the fellow had a little bit of a disagreement with one of his other parliamentarians and got into a fisticuffs on the floor of Parliament. But he prided himself in being a great rugby player. And I walked in, I had my person with me, and he had his person with me with the ubiquitous clipboard. And I said, Mallard, for a guy that claims he's played rugby, your nose is too straight. And that wasn't on any agenda. He loved it. He grabbed me, gave me a hug, and he said, we're going to be friends. And I said, I've got a son down here. He's been playing football, American football. He wants to play rugby. He said, I'll take care of it. In 2 days, he was calling me from his cell phone in an airport, apologizing because he hadn't been able to get back to me to tell me that he had set him up with a school for rugby. And but he would come to the house for dinner. We would fill his Ziploc full of Advil because they don't have Advil in New Zealand. And his old rugby bumps and bruises would come back at him. And we became very good pals, but that's a type of diplomacy that isn't in any handbook. And so between the rugby, the arts, and last of all, I brought the Harvard rowing team down there. And they competed against a wonderful club, and they competed on a river that had several bends in it, and unless you knew the river, you were going to lose because your oars were going to get hung up in the overhang. Of course, Harvard was beaten. But, and we all laughed about it, but in good humor. But New Zealand is, I think, one of the great assets that we have today as a family family of nations. My final meeting with the Prime Minister, she said, you made a difference, and it was a good difference. And that's what every ambassador wants to hear when they leave post. And with that, I have a 6-minute DVD I'd like to play, and it covers what we did at the residence regarding the display of Native American and Maori art. This has been distilled down from 11 minutes.
Could I invite Ambassador McCormick to say a few words?
Welcome everyone to our home. This is our second home. Our other home is in Portland, Oregon in the great Northwest. And I can tell you that this has been an extraordinary experience for us. The State Department has for many years had this Arts and Embassy program, and we took full advantage of it. This Arts and Embassy program allows American art, usually valuable paintings and sculptures, to be displayed in the residences of ambassadors throughout the world, so that guests can see unique art that represents the essence of the people of the United States. Gail and I believe there can be nothing more significant that represents our land than the arts of our first peoples.
We understand it is the first time that there has been an exhibit of Native American art in any of the embassies or residences through the Arts and Embassy program. So we are having an historic night this evening, because Native American art is not only of the past, but it deals with the contemporary perspectives on timeless themes. But there's more. Through our friendship with leading New Zealand contemporary Maori artist Darcy Nicholas and his wife Anne, we have been able to extend the exhibition from their collection to have examples of the major contemporary Maori artists and some of the new rising stars.
I must say that this is a wonderful gesture from you and your lovely wife Gail to host our artwork here in your residence. The beauty about this exhibition is a lot of this is from 19 Native American indigenous tribes, and every single item in that exhibition will have its own personal history and its own personal, what we call whakapapa or genealogy. So each carries its own power. Our role is to make sure, as tangata whenua, as Māori tangata whenua, that everything that's behind these pieces feels welcome.
It's really one of those things where when you come to a new country and you find out what an important role the First Peoples of New Zealand play, and then you look back and say, wow, we have a lot to say about our First Peoples in North America. So it was an easy choice that Gail took the initiative and did a lot of the work, and went all through the process with the State Department, and went through the process of getting our friends from the Portland Art Museum on board, and I have to give her the credit for doing this.
It's been an amazing tool for us over the last 3 years to use the art as a way of showing, not telling, about our art, our culture, and our past, and how connected we are through our art. It's sort of an aesthetic tool. It has paid in dividends that I can't describe on so many different levels. People have appreciated the art, they've appreciated the effort, they have appreciated the actual pieces themselves. When I told Darcy that I was going to be in Oregon in September of 2006, his eyes brightened and he said, well, you must come and help walk. The Eternal Threads was the name of the exhibition off the Warm Springs. Warm Springs is our tribe, it's out our back door. So the relationships that were forged from the beginning of this Art and Embassies project created so many opportunities throughout our tenure.
Could I invite Ambassador McCormick to say a few words?
Welcome everyone to our home. This is our second home. Our other home is in Portland, Oregon in the great Northwest. And I can tell you that this has been an extraordinary experience for us.
While you're still here, are there any brief questions or comments? To follow up on the ambassador lecture, I'll get you a microphone in a second. Yes, sir. Yeah. As always, if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Sherry Mueller, President Emeritus of the National Council for International Visitors. Thank you so much. This has been very inspiring to see actually how the Arts in the Embassies program can really work to maximum advantage for both countries. I wanted to ask whether you ran into any alumni of the International Visitor Leadership Program or the Fulbright program, and the extent to which you were saw the benefits of U.S. exchange programs as ambassador there.
Well, very much so. I saw many of the Fulbrighters. They would come to our house on Thanksgiving. All of the Fulbrighters from the U.S. in New Zealand would visit the embassy or visit our residence. And my son, who is 20 years old and discovering cocktails and tequila, was introducing tequila to many of these people, and it was probably the most colorful Thanksgiving I've ever sat at. But yes, we had, it was a great magnet. When you get into the arts, it's a common denominator for everyone. When you first go to New Zealand or any country, you're visiting with scientists, business people, farmers, whatever. But there's always that common denominator that you keep seeking, and that is truly the common denominator of the arts and humanities. Everyone identifies with that.
I think we had another question over here.
Hello, my name is Zhenya Vechininova. I'm a Fulbright student actually from Ukraine, currently enrolled in a master's program at Syracuse University studying public diplomacy. So my question is the following. Since I come from Ukraine, I know how the U.S. embassy is operating there and what kind of activities it is implementing on a permanent basis there. And what I've noticed, whenever the U.S. embassy in Ukraine is doing its cultural diplomacy, all of its efforts are aimed at the opinion leaders in the first place, just because, according to this cascading network, it is the opinion leaders who are supposed to influence the masses. However, in certain societies...
Good question. I know where you're going. What we did, this was trimmed down from 11 minutes. We had over 1,200 school children come and visit. And I got home many days where I would speak to them, or my wife Gail, who you saw, would speak to them and talk about the commonalities of the two peoples. And when she lived there many years ago, the Maori people were pretty much shunted by society. And New Zealand has really taken it upon themselves. The New Zealand national anthem is sung in both Maori and English. Everything they do is recognizing the value of the first peoples of New Zealand today. It's a far different world than it was when she lived there. And so my son came home speaking some words of Maori, but certainly learned the haka. Every kid learns the haka in New Zealand. And he had to teach his new rugby mates in Portland, Oregon, the haka. And they asked him not to do it anymore. It's too intimidating. But it's really, now they have really assimilated nicely over the last 30 years to the second people, the first people, I should say, that have had a second position in society. They've really been built up, and a lot through the arts. Darcy Nicholas is a very highly sought-after painter in New York. He has an agent in New York City. He sells everything that is sent to New York. And he's also, his brother is the broker for all contemporary Maori artists sending things to the States and to New York. And there's a certain amount of affluence that's developed from this. And I think what New Zealand schools do puts us to shame. They have incredible music programs and art programs, and the talents that come from those programs are incredible, and I've seen them work. Dance programs, fabulous. They have people that have studied in high school dance who have gone on and now dance in London. But that's true of their vocal talents, of their musicians. They're wonderful concert pianists. They really do it well in teaching. They don't cut their budgets when it comes to the arts and to music. And they really bring these folks along. But to answer your question, we really open the doors to New Zealand. And I wanted to go down there. I went down there to campaign. I didn't go down there to represent our country as much. I was there to campaign and let the people know and rebuild the friendships that we used to have with one another. It's very, how's that time?
It's okay. Another minute or so.
Excuse me. It's very interesting. Every segment of society, the old people remember when we sent down 30,000 Marines in World War II because the Japanese were going to invade New Zealand. And if you go into St. Michael's Church, they still have the Marine banner hanging in the nave with the 48-star American flag. And the old people remember when we saved them in World War II. The Japanese had their currency printed for the occupation of New Zealand. That's how close it came. But that generation loves us. And then there was the Vietnam generation who didn't. And the new generation, they don't listen to anybody like they do in this country. But it's really, they're rather apolitical. And I've got to tell you one quick story. I would speak to the senior class of any high school that I went to visit. And my wife, Gail, had this marvelous inspirational DVD about the swim across the channel with this Down syndrome woman. And she would have these kids eating out of her hand. It's such a great inspirational story that she was telling these kids, you can do anything you want. Look at this woman and what she's been able to do. And after she'd give that 15, 20-minute pitch, she'd take questions. And this one girl raised her hand. Gail was so confident she had them right by the hands of understanding. This girl stood up and said, "Do you let your daughter wear lipstick?" So there wasn't a lot of penetration of the inspiration, but Gail was my secret weapon. She was well versed in New Zealand living, and she has taken a personal interest in Native American art and problems in the Native American world. And right now she has a foundation that deals with female mutilation in Kenya and eliminating it. And she set up schools for widows that are 18 years old with 3 kids. And she has sent them back to school. She had micro businesses that she's developed. She put a well in to this one village where the women don't have to take all the kids and walk all day to get water to come back. I've just changed the paradigm of that community, and she's very, very active. And this was absolutely tailor-made for her participation in New Zealand. So I'm sorry she's not here today. She was as good an ambassador as I was.
Okay, well, on that note, I would like to ask everyone to please help me in expressing our sincere gratitude to Ambassador William McCormick. Thank you very much.